Right. So it's good to see everyone. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces here tonight. I'm sure a lot of you have met me from previous UX events. My name is Dami. Now we're talking to you guys on the topic finding the right UX metrics. Can you guys hear me without the mic? Yeah. Right. Awesome. So I'm going to be this talk is going to cover a few things. First, what are UX metrics? So I'm going to be talking about what they are, some examples of UX metrics, and the benefits that UX metrics serve. And then I'm going to be talking about the HEART framework, which is a framework that was developed by Google to help designers sort of figure out the right UX metrics to use depending on the goal of their product. And then I'm going to talk about avoiding vanity metrics, what vanity metrics are, and some real-life case studies of where they've been used. And then we'll do a bit of recap, and then we'll give some room for Q&A. Right, so who is Dami? Sounds like an existential question, but yeah. So I am a senior product designer. I currently work in-house here at Bupa. I work within the site-wide squad, and we are responsible for everything that goes within the website, from our campaigns to our health information pages. All that sort of stuff is what we sort of handle. So a bit about my background. I was born and raised in Nigeria, in West Africa. I started my career as a front-end web developer. So I went to uni and did computer science, and then I started getting into HTML, CSS. And then after uni, I got my first job as a front-end web developer. So my first job was in a startup environment. So we didn't really have any sort of UI UX designer on the team. So being the front-end guy, I had to sort of come up with a lot of the UI UX design. So during that period, I started learning about UI UX design as a discipline on its own, and I started to gravitate towards UI UX design. And then I spent the next 3.5 years in the fintech industry, and I worked at Citibank as a UX designer for about 2 years, and then I went out to lead a team of 8 designers to build out Alert. So Alert is the first digital bank in Nigeria, and what it does is allow you, make payments and open an account online. And prior to 2018, there was no digital bank in Nigeria, which meant if you wanted to sort of make payments or open a bank account, you needed to go physically to a bank branch, and that was a bit of a hassle. Imagine having to go to the bank every time you wanted to perform each single transaction. So that was a success for us. So I was there for about 2 years, and then I started to ask myself, what's next? I'm kind of like a goal-oriented person. I like to sort of like look at what to do next, pretty much. So I decided to leave Nigeria completely, left my family, left my friends, and decided to move here to the UK, which was the biggest risk of my life, by the way. But getting into the UK was a total culture shock for me. The way people interacted, all of that stuff, it was quite new to me. But, I had to relearn a few things. I had to unlearn some of the things that I'd learned before, just so I can adapt to the culture here in the UK. It was quite hard for me as well, because coming into the UK, I didn't have a job because I had left my job behind. And I started, I had to do manual jobs. So I got my first job as a bartender. Side note, I make really good cocktails, by the way. Yeah, I got my first job as a bartender. I did that for a while I was juggling my master's in computer science. And then halfway through my program, I finally got a part-time job at Cambridge Kinetics. So I worked as a sole designer on the team, and, we're building out a SaaS software, like an inventory management software that help people manage their inventory, like big businesses. So I did that for a while, for about 1.5 years, and then I finally got my job here at Bupa, and it's been great for the past 5 months. But yeah, that's a bit about me. So let's get into the talk. So what are UX metrics? Kind of finding it hard switching. So I'm sure we're quite familiar with the Pearson's law that states that which is measured improves. So whatever it is that you can measure, whether it's going to the gym or starting a new career or learning a new skill, if you're able to measure your performance, then you're able to improve your performance. So bringing it into the context of digital products, how can you measure how well your product is doing in the market? You do that by using success metrics. And what are success metrics? They are numerical data sets that are used to measure product performance. And an example would be things like app downloads or user signups. That's how you know whether your product is being adopted in the market or not. So these are some metrics that are often measured well by companies. We have product metrics, which are often measured by people like PMs, product managers, or marketing analysts. And then we have things like app downloads, which is the amount of downloads you get from you're getting. You have things like user signups. Companies also measure things like revenue to see if the business is making money, right? We also have engineering metrics. These are normally measured by developers. So developers want to know things like uptime, if the app is up and running. They also want to know things like latency, if the app is fast. And they also want to know what amount of memory is being used by the app. But you see that the UX metrics bit is quite missing in terms of measuring product performance, right? And that leads us to what UX metrics are. So UX metrics are quite similar to success metrics, but they are more user-centered data sets that are used to measure product performance. So they focus more on how users interact with the product. So these are some examples of commonly used UX metrics in the industry. We have things like task success rate, we have error rate, time on task, and customer satisfaction score. So I'll go deep into each of these guys. So we have task success rate. They measure the percentage of users who successfully complete a specific task or a goal within a product or a feature. So an example is, say we had a food delivery app like Uber Eats or Deliveroo, and 1,000 users are trying to sort of order food using the app. But 800 users were able to complete this process while 200 people dropped off for for whatever reason it is. We can then say task completion rate is 80%, because that means out of 1,000, 800 people were able to complete that process. So it's important to note that the higher the task success rate is for your products, this indicates that your product and service is very easy to use, because a lot of people are able to successfully complete tasks on your product. And these are some industry benchmarks to look out for. So anything above 60% is quite a good score in terms of task success rate. So the next metric is error rate. This measures the frequency of errors and mistakes made by users while interacting with a product or a feature. Say, for instance, 1,000 users are trying to interact with a sign-up form. If 200 errors were reported, it could be for different reasons. It could be maybe rage clicks, or people having errors with, having issues with entering their password or verifying their password and stuff like that. So those are examples of errors. And so to calculate the error rates, you simply divide the number of errors by the total number of interactions that you have from that specific feature or task. Now, the third metric is time on task, and this simply measures the average amount of time it takes users to complete a specific task within a product or service. And say, for instance, we add an e-commerce website, and we have 100 users trying to complete the checkout process. To calculate the average time it takes, you're going to sum up all of the times, that's the 100 for the 100 users, and then you divide it by 100, and that's how you get the average time on task. So you don't really need to bother about the formulas and how to calculate them. We have like analytic tools like Adobe Analytics, Google Analytics, and the likes. But just in case you probably work in a small team and you don't have access to these tools, you can sit with the developers and sort of get these parameters and do that manual process by yourself. But I just try to break it down so we really understand how to calculate some of these metrics, so we understand. So it's important to note as well that a high average time on task can help you identify areas where users might be experiencing delays or difficulties. So if you start to get a high rate of, if you start to get a high average time on task, helps you identify areas where users may be experiencing delays. And, the benchmark for this is always to ensure that your product is as fast as possible, pretty much. And the last metric is customer satisfaction score. And this measures how satisfied customers are with the experience of a product or a service. I'm sure a lot of us may have used Uber or Bolt to sort of book a ride. So after your ride is complete, you get asked the question, how would you rate your ride? They will ask you to rate from from 1 to 5, how well your trip was. So that's what we call, that's usually used to measure customer satisfaction score. And most of these feedbacks are mostly gotten immediately after your interaction, because that would help us to get the most effective feedback and the most accurate feedback. So we have detractors, passives, and promoters. So detractors are people that will most likely score that service from 1 or 2, meaning they didn't really enjoy using your product or your service. And we have passives, which are people that are bang in the middle. They probably didn't enjoy it that much, but they didn't really think it was that bad. And then we have promoters, which are people that rate the service or your product from 4 to 5, meaning they are quite satisfied with, the product. So in order to calculate your customer satisfaction score, you simply sum up your promoters and your passives, and then when you sum that up, you get the customer satisfaction scores. And then this is some of the benchmarks. So we should try to aim above 50% when we are, to ensure that we're getting the right satisfaction for our users. So we've talked a lot about what UX metrics are and some examples of UX metrics. And so it's important to point out what the benefits are when we sort of use UX metrics. And the first benefit is improved user experience. And what this means is if you're able to measure how well your product is performing in terms of the users, you're able to then know what areas need to be improved on your product, and then that would help you improve the experience overall for your product. Then we also have increased engagement and retention. This ties to the first point, which is improved user experience. Because when you're able to improve your user experience, that means a lot more users are likely to engage with your product, and they'll keep coming back, which is what retention means. They'll keep coming back to use your product. And then finally, we have product development prioritization. What this means is if you're able to measure what's working or what's not working, you know how to prioritize your development resource to tailor to probably what's not working, so you can then optimize that particular area. And what all of these benefits tie into is revenue, right? Because if you're able to prioritize your development resource, it means you spend less time and less money trying to cater to all of your features within your product, because now you know what users are using the most, and you know what's working and what's not working. And also, the more the engagement and the retention, the more the profit is going to soar. And then improved user experience just means happy customer, happy business. When your customers are happy, they most likely are going to come back to use your product, and that's going to improve your revenue. Right, so everything in life has got challenges, right? And so does UX metrics. So UX metrics are imperfect. And when you choose them poorly or you don't validate them enough, this would lead to the wrong product decision. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. So say this was a 30 days active users chart for your product, which just shows the number of users you're getting in 30 days. Looking at that graph, it looks like everything is going perfectly well, right? It looks like it's soaring, and that looks like a happy story, doesn't it? If you're a CEO or a product manager, you probably think everything is fine, we don't need to do anything, you guys just kick back and relax. But looking deeper, we see that even though we're getting a lot of new users in, we're also getting a lot of existing users out, right? So looking deeper, we're able to see that we might be doing things like sales right, we're doing things like marketing, everything is going well in terms of like bringing users into the funnel, but we are also losing users. So that points to the fact that something is definitely wrong with the experience of the product that's making people sort of drop off. So it's always important to have a more deeper view of what's going on, rather than just making decision off one metric. So it's always important to look at 2, 3, and as many metrics as possible to sort of understand really what's going on, so you can make the right product decision. Right. So just to do a bit of recap of what we've learned so far, we've learned that metrics are used to measure product performance. We've also learned that UX metrics are user-centered, that is, they focus more on the users and the experience that users or customers are getting. We've also learned that we must advocate for UX metrics to be classed alongside product and engineering metrics to give a holistic approach towards measuring product performance. And we've also learned that metrics are imperfect, and we must always consider getting a complete picture of customer satisfaction before making any informed design decisions. Right, so I'm gonna speak about the HEART framework. And so like I said, the HEART framework was developed by Google, and it basically helps you to choose the right UX metrics. So we've spoken a lot about what they are and the examples, but now just going deeper to understand how do I find what metrics to use for what I'm trying to sort of achieve. So the HEART framework stands for happiness, which is our users enjoying the product. We also have engagement. Do users interact deeply with the product or service? We also have adoption, which is do they discover and try out our product? And then we have retention. Do they keep coming back to use our product after they've left? And then we have task success, which is do users complete task effortlessly? So I'm going to go deeper into each of them, so just to give us some examples of metrics and when to employ them. Right. So if you're trying to if your goal is to measure how happy users are with your product, then you want to use some of these metrics like NPS or customer satisfaction score. And when I say happy, I don't really mean, oh, users are going, yay, the product is exciting, you guys should try this out. What I mean is your product really easy to use? Is the design simplistic enough? Are people able to come on your app, do what they need to do, and then get on with their day? So that's, for me, I think that's happiness, if I'm able to go on your app and then do what I need to do, and then off I go. So that's what I mean by happiness. So if that's your goal, really, to understand if people find your app easy enough to use, then you want to employ some of these UX metrics to help you understand what the performance is in the market. So we also have engagement. So if your goal is to measure how well people engage with your product and what the engagement is like with your app after you've launched, then you want to use metrics like click-through rates or time on sites, and also pages per session, because this gives you an idea of how people are interacting with your product after you've launched. So A stands for adoption, and if you're trying to measure how well users discover your product, then you want to use some of these metrics like new user signups, which helps you measure how many users you're getting on board. Conversion rate is quite similar to new user sign-up. It just shows you how many users have moved from non-existing customers to existing customers. And then you have trial to paid conversion rates, which measures how many users have started using the free trial of your product and then gone on to maybe purchase a paid version of your product due to the value that your product is offering. And then we have retention. So if you're trying to measure, if users are coming back to use your product, then you want to use metrics like user retention rate or churn rate or customer lifetime value. And finally, task success, which I think everyone should measure when, trying to understand how your product is performing. You should employ metrics like task success rate, error rate, or time to complete tasks. So to summarize the HEART framework, context is key. You need to understand what the goal is for your product so you understand what exactly to measure, right? So just a bit of recap as well. You can employ more than one metric. You just have to align it to what the goal is for your product. So if you're trying to measure things like adoption or retention, then you just need to plug in one of these metrics to help you understand how users are engaging with your product. Also, most UX metrics are quantitative, so they only point you to the signals. They only tell you something is wrong here. A lot of users are dropping off. This is happening, but then we must then do further research to get more quantitative insights. So we'll do that by doing maybe customer interviews to understand really what's going on. So that's what it means by, metrics are quantitative, and then we need to do more research to get the qualitative insights out. And then finally, we said the HARP framework is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not always applicable to every context. It's just like a tool in your toolbox. It's the same way we have like the design, we have like the double diamond frameworks and all other frameworks. It's just like a tool that you can use depending on the context of your product, pretty much. So lastly, I'll be talking on avoiding vanity metrics. Right, and what are vanity metrics? So a metric becomes vain when it gets glorified without providing meaningful insight into user behaviors or product performance. So bringing it to the context of humans, when do you say someone is vain? You say someone is vain when they're probably glorifying, material things, right? So say, for instance, I have a $500,000 watch. Having a $500,000 watch is good, right? But when I start to shout about it and say, oh, right, I've got this watch, I've got that watch, then I become vain, right? If I'm posting on social media, for instance, then you can say, right, that guy is vain. So same applies to vanity metrics, right? So when you start to, shout about vanity metrics, then when you start to shout about metrics, then they start to become vain. And I'll give you a perfect example. So we've got this McDonald's symbol that says they've served 377 billion customers. That's quite cool, right? 377 billion, but what does it say about, customer satisfaction, right? Do people enjoy, the Big Macs or, the chickens and the fries? We don't know, but we know they've served 377 billion people. So that's what vanity metrics mean, and we should try to stay away from metrics like this because they say nothing about the users and the experience that they are getting. I mean, I could take a bite of a bug and then say shit and then throw it in the bin, right? It doesn't say anything about that, but it just says, as long as you've served, you're just a number, and then they're getting you into that metric, and then it just keeps going up and up and up. Another example, which is quite common, is, I don't know if anyone has played this game. It's called PUBG. Has anyone played? You've played it, right? What would you say the graphic experience is? Meh, for me it's poor, it's quite shit. Compared to like other games like Call of Duty and the likes, it's quite poor. But they claim to be the number one most downloaded game in the world, and then they claim to be the number one downloaded game in 100 countries. I personally think the app is not that great because I've played other first-person shooter games, but this is an example of vanity metrics, and this is something that a lot of companies do. They tend to like glorify the number of app downloads rather than really understanding what the experience is, right? What is the graphics good? Is the the smoothness of the play good? No, they don't say anything about that. All they do know is, all they do is just glorify the number and say they're the number one most downloaded game. So yeah, vanity metrics are like show-offs, pretty much. That's the point I'm trying to get across. Yeah, so another example of a real-life case study is the Facebook potential reach scandal. So I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with Facebook ads and, the space that they create for people that want to like create advertisements and stuff. So prior to 2021, they sort of inflated their potential reach. That's the number of users that they can reach at a time. And they claim to have about 270 million people that they reach, right? But this excluded things like inactive users, right? Or fake accounts that might be on Instagram or on Facebook. So they didn't say anything about that, but they tried to cover it up just so they could drive the number up to say, hey, we've got 270 million people in terms of potential reach, right? And then what happened is one of the product managers then saw that they were inflating the numbers, and then they were adding, things like inactive users. And then the product manager spoke to one of the execs to say, hey, why don't we try and put the accurate number out there to say so they were getting roughly about 170 million active users, but they tried to quote it to say they were getting 270 million. So the product manager spoke to one of the execs, but they decided to keep it on the low and say nothing about it, just so they could keep, increasing their revenue. Because when they did the calculation, if they actually go by the number of active users, which is 170 million, that would mean they will get a 10% reduction in their total revenue. So that was one of the reasons, that was the big reason why they were sort of covering that up. But eventually they got found out in 2021 and they got slammed with a very big paycheck and they had to pay that amount. But this goes to show, you know, where vanity metrics has been used and where it's gone wrong and why we should stay clear of vanity metrics. So to summarize what vanity metrics are, they're quite superficial. You know, they're inflated numbers. They just keep going up and they don't say anything about product experience. They're misleading as well. They sell a false sense of success. Similar to what Facebook has did, and you know, things like McDonald's. They just, I mean, anyone that sees 377 billion probably thinks, you know, the burger is going to be the shit, right? But apparently not. But yeah, lastly, they have no real value. They're just numbers, right? They say nothing about, you know, what the experience is for users, pretty much. But yeah, I think that's it for me. Just a bit of recap, just so we. At least you can get something out of this. First, we said metrics are flexible. That means they can change for each context. So you need to understand what the context is, you know, what the goal of your product is. Are you trying to measure how people are adopting your product? Are you trying to measure, you know, how people click on things like your ads or your CTAs, all that stuff? You know, you need to really understand what exactly it is that you're trying to measure, and then you can then apply the right metrics to that. Designers must align business goals. Designers must align design with business goals to show their value. So UX metrics help designers to show their value, because if you're able to measure, you know, how well the product is doing in the market in terms of the users, then you can show your value to your stakeholders and say, hey, because of my design, we've seen that we're getting a lot more, you know, retention from this product, or we're getting a lot more users coming into the app. We're getting a lot more signups from this design that I've done. Because of that, I think you should give me a raise. Then you have a more solid case to put towards, to put to your stakeholders and say, you know, to give them a reason why they should give you a raise. It also helps you not to get fired as well, because if you're being asked, you know, so tell us why we shouldn't fire you, you can then go, looking at my numbers, because of my design, we were able to get so amount of numbers, and then, you know, that's why you shouldn't fire me, because I've made you this amount of money, right? So it's very good to use UX metrics as like a tool that you can always whip out whenever the case arises. We also talked about the HEART framework as a framework to help you choose the right UX metric. So it's one thing to know the UX metrics, it's another thing to know how to choose and what to choose, and that's where the HEART framework comes in. There are other frameworks out there as well. We have things like QX Score, you know, several other types of frameworks, but they just help you give your, you know, create a structure and like a guideline that you can use whenever you're trying to sort of pick out a UX metric, pretty much. And then finally, we talked about how UX metrics are useful to help us dig deeper, but then they become vanity when they get screamed about. So we talked about vanity metrics and, you know, how metrics are quite good, you know, on their own. They're great to help us measure product performance, but when they start getting screamed about without, you know, giving any real context into the experience of users, then it starts to become a vanity metric. But yeah, that's it from me, guys.